She boarded like anyone else with quiet steps and a simple bag. But what the crew didn't know was that the black woman sitting near the rear, calmly sipping warm water she was never offered, was the CEO of the entire airline. Why did the flight attendants mock her luggage? Why was she spoken to like an inconvenience? And why, after being humiliated, did she remain silent? Only to later fire the entire crew with 6 simple words. Who is Celeste Morgan, and how did one flight, one middle seat, and one careless insult expose the quiet system of everyday discrimination, hiding in plain sight, 30,000 feet above ground? This isn't just a story about power. It's about dignity, visibility, and a fire that's been burning in silence for far too long. What would you do if the people trained to serve looked straight through you? Stay with us as we reveal the true story of a woman who didn't just survive bias. She rewrote the rules of the sky. Before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss a story that moves your heart and challenges the world. Let's begin. The airport was humming, but not loud. That kind of hum that settles beneath your skin. Repetitive boarding announcements. Suitcase wheels dragging over polished tile. Coffee lids snapping shut. Gate agents calling out boarding groups like they were reading names off a forgotten list. It was 5:43 and no one made eye contact with anyone else unless they had to. Celeste Morgan didn't mind. She stood near Gate B-19 at Denver International, holding a small gray leather satchel in her left hand. Her coat was simple wool, dark charcoal, no logo. Her shoes were clean but worn in. Nothing about her screamed important, and that was intentional. In fact, she had spent years making sure she blended into places just like this. The gate agent never looked up as she scanned her boarding pass. Group 1, first class, seat 2A. Next, the agent called flatly, waving Celeste through like she was air. Celeste walked slowly, deliberately, heels quiet against the jet bridge. 2 passengers in front of her, white, well-dressed. Late 40s were welcomed aboard by name. Good morning, Mr. Colton, Mrs. Colton. Coffee or orange juice today? No one greeted her the moment she stepped into the aircraft. The lead flight attendant glanced at her briefly, then looked over her shoulder, as if Celeste was part of the cleaning crew coming to do one last sweep before final boarding. There was a small pause. Then the attendant, a tall woman with styled blonde hair and bright coral lipstick, stepped aside without a word. Celeste nodded politely. No response. She walked toward her seat, second row on the left, aisle side. A window seat was empty beside it. Already, a man in 1C had spread out his laptop, using the middle armrest like it belonged to him. He glanced up when she passed but didn't move. Seat 2A. She placed her bag carefully in the overhead bin, then slid into the leather seat. Smooth, deliberate motion, hands folded in her lap, spine straight. She closed her eyes for just a second. She had done this exact route 7 times in the last 5 months, Denver to Baltimore, each time under a different name on the manifest. Each time, no one recognized her. That was the point. At 5:51, a flight attendant named Rachel Langley, same coral lipstick, leaned in from the galley, eyes flicking up and down. Excuse me, miss, we're not boarding economy yet. Celeste opened her eyes slowly. I'm in 2A, she said calmly, voice low but clear. Rachel blinked, then leaned forward to look at the seat number. Right. But are you sure this is... She didn't finish the sentence. Instead, she gave a tight-lipped smile and walked back toward the galley. 2 rows back, someone chuckled. Celeste didn't look. At 5:54, another crew member appeared, male, early 50s, sharp jawline, crisp uniform. His name tag read Derek. He spoke loudly enough for the cabin to hear. "We've had an issue before with ground staff getting on early by mistake," he said to Rachel, not bothering to lower his voice. "You want me to check credentials?" Rachel motioned toward Celeste. "She says she's in 2A. Celeste said nothing. Derek turned to her. "Ma'am, do you have a boarding pass for this cabin?" She handed it over, calm as ever. He glanced at it, then looked back at her, eyes narrowing. "You work in baggage handling or terminal services, I don't," Celeste replied simply. Derek studied her, jaw tight. "It's just that we've had issues with crew members accidentally sitting in premium." "I am not crew," she said softly. "I am a passenger." Behind her, someone coughed. Rachel reached for Celeste's satchel in the overhead compartment. "Maybe we could just check with the front desk to clarify things." "No, thank you," Celeste said, eyes still calm, hands resting quietly. "There's no need." But Rachel tugged the bag down anyway. It thudded gently against the floor. Celeste exhaled, almost silently. She looked at Derek. "You're making a mistake." He crossed his arms. "And what makes you say that?" Another beat passed. Celeste reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a slim black phone, tapped once, and held it to her ear. Her voice remained steady, almost warm. "Activate code gray. Flight 20-7. 8 personnel. Immediate action." Then she ended the call. Rachel paused, frowning. What? Was that Celeste met her eyes no threat, no malice, just a steady gaze? You'll find out shortly. There was a silence that stretched longer than anyone in first class was used to. Then came the call from the front, final doors not closed yet. Security's approaching. In row 2A. Celeste folded her hands again. Across the aisle, a woman in a tailored red dress slowly put her coffee down. No one quite understood what they had just witnessed. But something had shifted. The aircraft was still grounded. And Celeste Morgan hadn't raised her voice once. The plane wasn't moving. Not yet. A low mechanical hum buzzed beneath the cabin floor, while sunlight spilled through the oval windows, streaking across armrests and tucked-away tray tables. Outside, a fuel truck rumbled by. Inside, time felt like it had paused, but only for one person, Celeste Morgan. She sat in seat 2A, back upright, eyes trained softly ahead, not on anyone in particular. She was still, not stiff, not frozen, just still, like someone waiting for truth to catch up with the room. Across the aisle, the woman in red glanced down at her phone, then back at Celeste. She shifted uncomfortably. The man beside her cleared his throat. Rachel Langley was still gripping the handle of Celeste's bag. It was a soft leather satchel, nothing showy. But the way Rachel held it like it was a lost item left behind by some utility worker made the whole gesture feel heavier than it should have been. Behind Rachel, Derek Sloman was trying to calculate something. His eyes flicked between the boarding pass he'd just checked, the woman now seated before him, and the growing awkwardness in the first-class cabin. "I've been flying this route for 11 years, he said, almost to himself. "I've never seen you on this manifest," Celeste replied gently. "I wasn't on the manifest last week either." Rachel shifted her weight, annoyed. "Miss, if we could just escort you to the jet bridge for a quick clarification. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," Celeste said. It wasn't a declaration. There was no edge to it. But it landed with more force than shouting ever could. Alina Navarro, the youngest flight attendant on the crew, stood behind them now. She had just returned from securing the galley. Her dark hair was tied in a low bun, her posture trained, but tense. She wasn't sure what was going on, but she could feel something was wrong. A ripple passed through the cabin. Word had started to spread, quiet whispers between passengers who had seen enough to know this wasn't normal. From row 3, a man leaned forward to catch a better look. He tapped his wife's arm and whispered something under his breath. She looked, nodded, then looked away. One seat behind Celeste, a teenage boy took out his phone. The energy had shifted, and Rachel Langley knew it. "Look," Rachel said, trying to regain control. "We have policies for premium boarding zones. We've had issues with ground staff getting on early." "I didn't get on early," Celeste interrupted, her voice still soft. "You scanned my boarding pass." Rachel hesitated. "And your colleague," Celeste added, glancing at Derek, "looked at it and still assumed I was part of your cleaning crew." A long silence. Then Derek stepped forward. "That's not what I said." "You didn't need to," Celeste said. "Assumption speaks louder than speech." Alina glanced toward Celeste. Their eyes met for just a moment. There was something in that gaze, like a question quietly being asked and answered all at once. "Who are you? Why are you so calm?" Celeste turned back toward the window. Outside, the tarmac shimmered under the rising sun. Somewhere in the far distance, a flight took off into the orange sky. She could hear it, faintly, the roar of engines, the leap of steel into air. For a moment, she wished she were on that flight instead. Rachel was now standing awkwardly near the curtain that separated first from economy, unsure whether to push further or back off. She looked over at Derek, waiting for him to say something, but he was staring at his tablet. His hand hovered over the screen. Then it dropped. He sighed. "Passenger 2A," he mumbled, more to himself than anyone else. "Priority level gray. Internal code. Clearance tier 3. He looked up at Rachel, his face suddenly pale. "We need to step off this," he said, quietly. "What?" "We need to disengage. Now." Rachel blinked. "What are you talking about?" Derek leaned closer. "She's tagged in the system. High security client. Tied to a major holding group. Virion." The name hit Rachel like a slap. Virion Holdings. Every flight crew member had heard of it. One of the biggest equity firms in North America. Quiet, powerful, and brutally exacting in their audits. Rumor was, if Virion reviewed your route, you'd better have nothing in your closet. Rachel's hand dropped from the satchel. It was too late. From the front of the plane, a uniformed officer stepped aboard. Airport security. Behind him came a woman in a black suit and headset. Her eyes scanned the front row, like radar. "Can I see Flight Operations Lead Langley and Supervisor Sloman?" the woman said. Voice firm, but even. Passengers leaned to the aisle now. Celeste did not turn her head. Rachel was frozen. "I was just," she stammered. The officer raised a hand. "You'll have a chance to explain. Come with us now." Rachel and Derek moved slowly, quietly, like something sacred had broken and they didn't want to make it worse by stepping on the pieces. As they exited the cabin, the door still open, silence fell again. Alina stepped forward hesitantly, then bent to pick up Celeste's satchel. She held it with both hands. Gently. "May I return this to you?" Ma'am Celeste looked up, studied the young woman's face. A beat. "Thank you," Celeste said. Alina returned the bag carefully to the overhead bin. Then she stood near the seat, unsure whether to stay. "I'll be taken over this row," she said after a moment. voice unsure. Celeste nodded once. "That's fine." Passengers whispered around them. Phones buzzed with notifications. Someone near the rear had already posted a short video clip, just 15 seconds, of Celeste sitting quietly while her bag was pulled down by force. It had been captioned, "They really thought she worked the tarmac." She didn't even blink. Alina sat on the jump seat beside the lavatory and tried to calm her breathing. She didn't know who this woman was. Not exactly, but she felt it in her bones. She was someone who saw everything. Someone who didn't need to raise her voice to move mountains. Celeste Morgan looked out the window again. The plane began to push back from the gate. And for the first time that morning, no one questioned her right to be where she was. The aircraft began taxiing slowly across the runway, a gentle hum rising beneath the floorboards as the cabin settled into a strange, suspended stillness. No one was speaking now. Not the way they had before. Something had changed, and everyone knew it. Celeste Morgan remained in seat 2A, hands folded gently in her lap. Her face turned slightly toward the window. Her reflection appeared faintly in the glass soft brown eyes, high cheekbones, calm shoulders. She didn't move. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She simply breathed. Behind her, Alina Navarro moved quietly through the aisle, completing the final safety checks. She paused near row 2, hesitant, then leaned down just enough to whisper, "Would you like a blanket, Ms.?" Morgan Celeste didn't respond right away. When she did, her voice was steady. "No, thank you." Alina gave a slight nod and stepped away. Across the aisle, the man in seat 2C balding, mid-50s, a watch that cost more than some cars, shifted uncomfortably. His eyes kept darting toward her, then away, like he wanted to say something but didn't trust himself to speak. The woman in red from row 1 clutched her designer tote in her lap. She had been one of the first to scoff when Celeste walked aboard. Now, she just sat silently, avoiding eye contact like it might burn. The silence wasn't loud, but it wasn't peaceful either. It was the kind that makes people squirm. Celeste had seen that kind of silence before, when she was 23, working baggage claim overnight to pay for grad school. A man once dropped his luggage near her feet and barked for help without even looking at her. When she asked him to please be patient, he called her a name she never repeated, not even to herself. That night she went home, made tea, and wrote in her journal, "Power doesn't need to roar. It just needs to be ready." She had carried those words ever since. At 6:23 QM, the flight was airborne. 15 minutes later, turbulence struck. Just a brief jolt, enough to make coffee slosh in cups and laptops tremble on tray tables. Alina reemerged with a towel, mopped up a spill near row 3, then made her way forward again. She paused beside Celeste. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Celeste looked up, not surprised. For what Alina hesitated. Her hands trembled slightly. "For not stepping in sooner. I heard how they spoke to you. I saw it." Celeste held her gaze for a long second. "Then remember it," she said gently. "Not for me, for the next person." Alina swallowed hard and nodded. Then she returned to the galley. In the cockpit, the co-pilot turned toward the captain with a subtle glance. "She's the woman," he said under his breath. The captain nodded. "Yeah, she's the one from the audit files. Virian's executive chair. No one told us she was boarding this route. They weren't supposed to." The co-pilot exhaled. "We're not getting fired, are we? I think we're getting watched." Back in the cabin, someone opened a news app. There it was. A blurry photo taken earlier that morning of Celeste seated calmly while two uniformed staff hovered over her. The caption read, "Passenger mistaken for airport staff." Turns out to be the boss of the airline's parent company. The photo was already trending. The comments were flooding in. Some were outraged. Some, predictably, were dismissive. But most were stunned. She never raised her voice. She didn't announce who she was. She just watched. Celeste leaned back and closed her eyes. She could feel the weight of it building behind her temples. Not a headache, but something heavier, a grief of sorts, because she knew this wasn't about her. Not really. It was about the hundreds, maybe thousands of passengers who never had the power to say anything, who were talked down to, ignored, misjudged, who got called sir or ma'am with a sneer or a side glance, who were assumed to be anything but what they were. That weight wasn't easy to carry, but she carried it anyway. The intercom pinged overhead. The captain's voice crackled through, calm and composed. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've reached our cruising altitude of 34,000 feet. Weather ahead looks clear. We'll begin beverage service shortly." The intercom clicked off. Celeste opened her eyes and looked toward the galley curtain. A part of her wanted to let it go. Just rest. Just get through the flight. Just land. But another part of her, the part that remembered every comment, every misstep, every time she had to prove herself in rooms where no one else had to know better. She tapped her phone once. It opened to a secure system. She typed a single line, "ARRI protocol activated, discrete audit, full footage retrieval, report in 12 hours. Then she locked the phone and tucked it away. Across the aisle, the man in 2C finally spoke. I had no idea who you were," he said softly. Celeste turned slightly. "I know," she replied. "You weren't supposed to." He looked like he wanted to apologize but didn't know how. After a moment, he said, "You handled that with more grace than I think I could have." Celeste gave a small nod. It wasn't about grace. It was about clarity. He frowned, confused. "I don't correct people to feel powerful," she said, her voice low. "I correct them to prevent the next mistake." He didn't respond, just stared out the window. The curtain parted again. Alina emerged with a tray of coffee and water. She approached Celeste first. Celeste smiled faintly. "Thank you." Alina hesitated. "Would you like sugar or milk?" "Just water." Alina nodded. As she moved down the aisle, Celeste took the cold cup between her hands and let herself breathe. She wasn't angry, not in the way people expected. She was disappointed, tired, focused, and more than anything, she was ready. The next stage wouldn't happen in the air. It would happen on the ground, where systems lived, where silence turned into patterns, and where power could either fix or destroy. Celeste looked out the window again, her reflection now softened by light. This wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The air in the cabin was warmer now. The sun had climbed higher outside, casting golden strips of light across the cabin ceiling. Somewhere overhead, the hum of the aircraft remained steady, like a heartbeat too consistent to notice. Passengers had settled into a quiet rhythm, reading or pretending to, but not Celeste. She sat still in seat 2A, sipping water from a plastic cup as if it were the last thing tethering her to the ground. Her fingers were calm, but her mind was not, because there was something most people didn't understand about silence. Silence could hold anything: anger, disgust, fear, power, and sometimes it held a kind of decision that made everything after it inevitable, In Celeste's world, silence didn't mean passivity. It meant patience. A few rows back, a middle-aged woman in a fleece vest whispered to her husband, "That's the woman they mistook. She's some kind of executive." Her voice was hushed but urgent. "Heard she owns the company or something." The man shrugged, eyes on his tablet. Rumors were already leaping between rows like electricity. No one said it loudly, but they all felt something had happened this morning. Something bigger than a boarding error, bigger than one crew member's ignorance. Celeste pulled out her phone again, but not to read the flood of messages already buzzing through private channels. Not yet. She opened her notes app. She typed 6 words. Fire them now. All of them. She didn't send it. Not yet. But she looked at those words for a long moment. Rachel Langley, Derek Sloman, the communications officer who flagged her for pre-boarding watchlist review last month. The regional HR director who signed off on last year's diversity optics campaign, then removed 3 equity clauses behind closed doors. She knew them all. She had spent the last 6 months riding planes like this, dressed simply, alone, unannounced, observing, not investigating, not officially, but now that had changed, because now it was personal. Celeste closed the app and slipped the phone back into her coat. From the jump seat near the galley, Alina Navarro watched her quietly. She'd never seen a passenger like this before, not just in demeanor, but in presence. There was something about Celeste that made time slow down, made people rethink their own voices. She leaned toward Celeste again. "May I get you anything?" "Something warm." Celeste shook her head, but smiled. "You're kind. You don't have to fix this." Alina hesitated. "Can I ask something?" "Of course. Why didn't you tell them who you were, back when they were saying what they said?" Celeste looked out the window, then back at her. "Because I needed to know what they said when they thought no one important was listening." Alina let the words sink in. That's a hard way to live." Celeste nodded slowly. "It is, but it's the only way to see the truth." Alina walked back to the galley, chest tight. Meanwhile, a new alert popped onto Celeste's phone screen. Airy Protocol preliminary logs received, audio pulled, gate footage synced, witness logs in progress. It had begun. Across the country, 3 executives were already on their second call of the morning. They had woken to the trending video, only to find out the woman in it was the chair of Virion Holdings. Not a client, not a stakeholder, the chair. Celeste Morgan. Boardroom lights were flipping on across time zones. Internal chats were swarming. PR firms were on standby. But none of them could stop what had already been set in motion. Because Celeste had been watching. Not just this crew, not just this airline, the entire system. She had the data, the breakdowns, the quiet internal surveys where minority crew members confessed to feeling invisible, the footage from other flights, other routes, where passengers were downgraded, ignored, or removed for nothing more than how they looked. And it had always been denied, buried, dismissed as isolated. But now, Celeste had proof. Now, she had a story, and the world was watching. She picked up her phone again, typed one final sentence beneath the 6 words she had written before. Deliver message verbally at destination. Then she locked the screen. As the plane neared the East Coast, clouds thickened outside. Gray smears rolled across the windows like smoke. Somewhere beneath it all, Baltimore waited. Back in the cabin, the energy had shifted again. Now, people sat straighter, waited, wondered. Some looked at Celeste with fascination. Others, with quiet guilt. A few simply watched. The intercom crackled again. We'll begin our descent into Baltimore shortly. Flight crew, prepare for arrival. Celeste adjusted her seatbelt. Her heart was steady, but her thoughts were not. For a split second, she remembered her mother Gloria Morgan kneeling beside her at age 8, helping her polish her little black shoes for the first day of 3rd grade. Celeste had cried that morning, not because she was scared of school, but because the year before, a teacher had confused her with the janitor's daughter 3 times in 1 week. Gloria had wiped her tears gently and whispered, "They'll always see what they expect. You don't owe them more than your truth." Celeste never forgot that, and today, that truth was finally coming to meet the world on its own terms. The wheels hit the runway with a thud. Passengers jolted forward, then settled back. Seatbelt signs blinked overhead. The plane slowed, curved off the runway, and rolled toward the gate. Outside the window, ground staff waited with orange batons raised. The plane stopped. A chime rang out. Doors unlocked, but no one stood. Not yet, because suddenly, the captain's voice returned. "Ladies and gentlemen, we ask for your attention. We have a special guest on board today. Before deplaning, please remain seated for an announcement." A ripple passed through the cabin. Celeste stood, not hurried, not slow. She turned to face the cabin. Passengers turned toward her, wide-eyed, expectant. Celeste's voice was quiet, but every word carried. 6 months ago, I began boarding flights across this country to see the system from the inside. Not from a boardroom, not from a press release, but from where everyday people sit. What I've seen, what I've heard, confirmed what many of us have known for years. She paused. I didn't speak earlier today because I needed the system to show itself, unfiltered. Her eyes moved from face to face, and it did. She lifted her phone. I have just issued 6 words to my executive team, words that will remove 8 individuals from active duty and trigger a full audit of this airline's crew culture, gate operations, and reporting chain. Her eyes landed briefly on Alina, but not all voices were complicit. And those who saw those who paused, who chose dignity, will help shape what comes next. There was no applause, only silence, the kind that changes things. Celeste sat down, the doors opened, and the world outside was waiting. The terminal gate was quiet as Celeste Morgan stepped off the plane. There was no press waiting, no cameras flashing, no entourage, just the muted shuffle of shoes on carpet and the occasional soft murmur as passengers exited behind her, stealing glances in her direction. She walked with purpose, but not hurry. Her black coat moved lightly behind her, the same way it had in dozens of other airports over the past half-year. She carried nothing but her satchel, now resting on her shoulder, and something in her expression that made people give her space without knowing why. At the end of the jet bridge, a woman in a navy suit stood waiting. "You're early," Celeste said, barely glancing at her. Protocol triggered red-level review. The woman replied, "We rerouted 2 team leads from HQ. You've got a secure room prepped upstairs." Celeste nodded once and followed. They passed through a restricted corridor, flanked by plain walls and buzzing fluorescent lights. At the end of the hall, a fingerprint scanner blinked to green. The door opened to a small conference room, empty except for a screen, a folder on the table, and a carafe of water. Celeste removed her coat, placed it over the chair, and sat. "I want the list," she said calmly. The woman handed her the folder. Inside, a document printed on heavy matte paper bore the header, Airy Protocol, Event 12. BWI Route 736. She scanned the page. Her eyes paused on each name like they were weights being quietly measured. She didn't react as she read. Not to Rachel Langley. Not to Derek Sloman. Not even to the assistant shift manager at Denver, who had checked her ID and smiled a little too wide as he radioed something the system had flagged as a non-standard VIP boarding. What made her pause was a name near the bottom. Catherine Wells, Director of In-Flight Culture and Service Observation. Not present. Authorization signature found in pre-boarding override. Celeste tapped the page. She authorized the manifest override. The woman in the suit nodded. Yes, ma'am, but she's currently in Phoenix attending the Route Expansion Symposium. Celeste leaned back in her chair. Send her the footage anyway. All of it. The woman hesitated. There's a clause she'll want to see it, Celeste said, more quietly this time. She's the one who wrote the policy about intentional culture cultivation. Let her watch what her culture looks like now. The woman nodded and left. Celeste stared at the screen. It was dark for a moment. Then it lit up. A split-view window showed two angles of the boarding process, one from the jet bridge, the other from inside the cabin. She watched herself enter the frame, calm, composed, ticket already in hand. She watched Rachel take her bag, watched Derek speak with her like she was a temp worker lost on the wrong shift. She watched herself not flinch. And in another corner of the video feed, she saw the expression on Alina Navarro's face. Not shock, not defiance, just a kind of quiet ache. The look of someone who saw something unfair but had been taught too many times to stay in her lane. Celeste hit pause. The room was still. She pressed the intercom on the desk. Get me a personnel file on Alina Navarro. Within 2 minutes. It was in her hands. 23 years old. Bilingual. Repeated commendations for composure during turbulence events. No incidents. Filed 2 informal complaints that were never escalated. She studied the photo. Eyes sincere. Posture formal. Something about the face stayed with her. Celeste placed the folder beside her and closed her eyes for a moment. What am I doing? It wasn't a new question. It visited her often, sometimes in boardrooms after long presentations that ended with applause but left her feeling hollow, sometimes in hotel rooms where she saw herself in the mirror and thought, "You're still proving yourself, aren't you?" Sometimes on planes like this one, when the truth about power and perception felt heavier than steel. She opened her eyes and stood. The door clicked softly behind her as she left. An elevator took her down to the employee level of the terminal. She stepped out, walking past rows of vending machines, dusty posters, and a wall of framed crew photos that hadn't been updated in at least 2 years. At the end of the hall, she saw her, Alina Navarro, still in uniform, seated on a bench near the break room, holding a half-empty bottle of water. She looked up and immediately stood. "Ms. Morgan," she said quickly. "I didn't expect you don't need to stand," Celeste said gently. "You're not in trouble." Alina sat slowly, uncertain. Celeste sat beside her. "You're new," she said softly. Alina nodded. "A year and 8 months. This was supposed to be a transfer route, but we've been understaffed, so I stayed." Celeste studied her face. "You didn't speak up earlier." Why Alina looked down at her hands. "I've seen what happens when junior staff contradict the leads. We get retrained or cut from premium crew assignments. One girl got pulled from international for asking why a first-class passenger was downgraded without cause." Celeste nodded slowly. "I understand." Alina's eyes flickered up. "But I should have done more. I knew it was wrong." Celeste looked at her for a long moment. You didn't speak then? But you're speaking now. Alina swallowed. Is that enough? Celeste offered the faintest smile. It's a start, a pause. Then Celeste stood. Follow me. Alina blinked. Now Celeste nodded. They walked together through the corridor. No one stopped them. No one questioned the pairing of a young flight attendant beside a woman in civilian clothes with quiet power in her stride. Back in the conference room, Celeste gestured to the chair. Alina sat on the screen. The footage was paused exactly where it had been. Celeste clicked play. The moment replayed again. The mistaken identity. The questions. The silence. Alina looked away, but Celeste's voice was steady. I want you to watch it. Not to punish yourself. To remember what it feels like when you don't look away. Alina turned back toward the screen and watched. The sun had begun to rise higher over Baltimore, casting streaks of white light across the terminal's outer windows. The glass caught the reflections of the runway, the empty gates, and the moving trucks that hummed along like quiet insects in the distance. Inside the secured room, the glow from the monitor still flickered across the floor. Celeste Morgan stood near the window now, looking out. Behind her, Alina Navarro remained seated, eyes fixed on the final frames of the paused flight footage. Her jaw was tight, but her shoulders had softened. In the reflection on the monitor, Celeste could see the change. She'd seen that look before, on younger staff, on interns, on herself years ago. The moment where guilt begins to turn into conviction. Celeste stepped forward and powered down the screen. We've seen enough, she said. Alina turned to her, uncertain. Will you be giving a report? Celeste gave a half nod, measured and calm. Yes, but not just about them. She picked up a folder and handed it to Alina. What's this? The younger woman asked. A choice, Celeste said. That's your flight log, your commendation letters, the crew surveys you submitted that no one followed up on, and 3 recommendations I wrote this morning. Alina blinked. You wrote them on your behalf. Celeste clarified. If you want to transfer to the training division in New York, I've already signed the request. You'll help design a new empathy curriculum. Alina's throat tightened. You'd do that. For me? Celeste gave a soft smile. I don't reward silence, but I always invest in someone who's willing to grow from it. Alina nodded, overwhelmed. I'll go. I want to. Celeste touched her shoulder lightly. Then go make it better for the ones after you. Alina stood, holding the folder to her chest like it was something fragile. Then she left, and Celeste was alone again. She returned to the center table, where her phone buzzed twice. An alert from the ARI division. Internal memo. Level 4. Distribution complete. Celeste tapped the document and scanned it. It had already gone out to every senior executive, every regional manager, and every internal team leader across Virion Holdings and its airline subsidiaries. The subject line was stark. The culture you defend is the culture you become. Beneath it, Celeste's signature. She reread the memo, line by line, not because she doubted it, but because words mattered. We cannot build a dignified service culture while protecting those who weaponize politeness to cover prejudice. The quiet shrug, the small smirk, the silent downgrade. These are not accidents of protocol. They are outcomes of tolerated belief. She paused. Every policy designed to protect passengers is only as strong as the values of those enforcing it. When those values falter, the damage is not just emotional. It becomes structural. Another pause. Effective immediately, a third-party ombuds office will be assigned to review all recorded flight logs, gate complaints, and staff treatment surveys over the last 24 months. Additionally, real-time incident review AI will be expanded to include every cabin on all domestic routes. And finally, 8 crew members have been removed from duty today, not because they made one mistake, but because they made many, and the system let them. Celeste closed the file. Her hands were steady, but her heart was not. She looked down at her watch. 10:17 a.m. She had a board call in 13 minutes. In another room, in another building. Her name would flash across a screen as other directors logged in from Hong Kong, Zurich, and Toronto. And none of them would know what it felt like to be asked to hand over your own luggage in front of 20 strangers while wearing the same coat you wore to negotiate a billion-dollar acquisition 3 days earlier. She reached for her bag, then paused. Something in her body said, "Wait." So she did. A memory arrived, uninvited, not from the flight, but from 15 years ago. She was working late in her first executive role, still unsure if the word executive really applied to someone who rarely got invited to the post-meeting dinners. Her male counterpart had introduced her to a client once as our team support, and she hadn't corrected him, not because she didn't want to, but because she didn't think it would matter. That night she had gone home, removed her heels in the dark, and stood barefoot in her tiny kitchen. She had whispered aloud to herself, almost defiantly, "They'll remember my silence more than my title." Now, standing in this airport conference room, she realized how wrong she had been. Silence was forgettable. Action was not. Her phone buzzed again. It was a message from Marcus Ellery, her chief of safety and ethics, the one man on her team who always listened first, spoke second. "Heard about the BWI event. I'm ready when you are." Celeste typed back, "Activate public transparency protocol. Internal video goes wide. Timestamp and secure context framing. No edits, no spin." 3 dots appeared, then understood. "This won't be quiet." She stared at the message for a long time, then typed one last sentence. It was never meant to be. Outside the window, the runway continued to hum with quiet movement. Life didn't stop for culture shifts. Flights didn't delay for emotional clarity, but they could land in different places. Celeste gathered her coat, adjusted her cuffs, and stepped out of the room. 2 minutes later, a secure upload pinged live. The footage of Flight 736 boarding, no filters, no commentary, just the facts. By noon, major outlets were already requesting statements. A few internal staffers sent messages of quiet gratitude. One even wrote, "My mother experienced this. Thank you for not staying silent." Celeste responded to no one. Not yet. She was already on her way to Gate C-12, because the audit wouldn't end here. There were still more flights to board, still more eyes to meet, still more truths to hear from mouths too used to never being believed. Celeste Morgan walked with quiet force, coat pressed against her side by the moving air, and behind her, the system finally began to shift. The corridor to Gate C-12 was quiet, unusually so. No families jostling with strollers, no buzzing groups of college students, just the soft squeak of rubber soles on tile and the occasional overhead announcement muffled by distance. Celeste Morgan moved with quiet precision, blending in the way only someone deeply practiced in restraint could. The woman at the gate didn't even glance up as she approached. Then she did, and blinked. "Oh," she said, standing straighter, tugging at her blazer. "Ms. Morgan, I didn't know you'd be traveling again today." Celeste offered a nod, not unkind, but measured. "I'm flying standby." The woman hesitated. "I think we can do better than standby." Celeste looked her in the eye. "I asked for standby. No alerts, no announcements, no upgrades." The gate agent understood immediately. She returned to her screen and tapped quietly. The click of keys the only sound between them. "There's a seat on 2483 to Atlanta. Back row. No frills." "Perfect," Celeste replied. As the agent printed the boarding slip, she leaned in just slightly. "I saw the footage," she whispered. "My sister's a gate lead in Kansas City. She cried watching it." Celeste didn't respond right away. She accepted the slip, nodded once, and said gently, "Tell her it wasn't about going viral. It was about going forward." The woman nodded, eyes damp. Celeste turned toward the seating area and chose a chair near the corner window. She sat with her back to the terminal walkway. It was a small act of privacy in a world where her name now filled inboxes, headlines, and hashtags. She was no longer anonymous. Not for a long time. She rested her satchel on her lap and closed her eyes for a moment. Just a moment. She was tired, but not in the way sleep could fix. It was a bone-deep exhaustion born from too many conversations that began with, "I didn't mean it like that," and ended with, "But why does it matter so much to you?" The kind of fatigue that came from decades of micro moments of being mistaken, misnamed, misjudged, and the effort of correcting each one with grace, knowing full well that too much honesty could cost you everything. She exhaled softly. She wasn't here to be comfortable. She was here to see. Across the concourse, a crew emerged from a secured hallway. They walked in a loose V formation, pulling roller bags, laughing at something one of them had said. 3 men, 1 woman, mid-level uniforms. 1 wore mirrored sunglasses, even indoors. Celeste recognized the insignia. The Southeast Division, one of the older unions. She watched them approach the gate, still laughing. One of them, a tall man with a trimmed beard and too much swagger, spotted her. He slowed. The laughter stopped. He turned to his crewmates and muttered something under his breath. They all looked. Celeste didn't flinch. She remained seated. The bearded man leaned on the counter and flashed a practiced smile at the agent. "You've got us on 2483 right?" he asked casually. "Yes," the agent replied, voice neutral. "Final review now." Then the man turned toward Celeste and nodded once, almost like a challenge. "Ma'am," he said. Celeste met his eyes. "Flight leader?" she asked calmly. His smile faltered. "Yes. Name?" He hesitated. Why Celeste tilted her head slightly. "I like to know who's responsible for the tone of the cabin." The man straightened. "You'll find we're very professional, ma'am." "I'm sure I will," Celeste replied. She stood and walked past him toward the boarding lane. "Behind her," one of the crew muttered. "Didn't think she'd actually fly with us." The boarding scan beeped. Celeste stepped into the jet bridge. She could feel it already, the discomfort, the tension, the subtle recalculations happening behind every glance. She took her seat in the back row. No window, a loose tray table, a seat belt that clicked too loudly. She liked it. It was honest. Passengers began boarding. One by one, they passed without recognition. A few glanced her way, but most were preoccupied with luggage, phones, and the quiet dread of air travel. The bearded flight leader entered last, checking compartments with more flair than necessary. When he reached the rear, he paused by a row. "If there's anything you need, just let us know." Celeste nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Cameron," he said. "Dante." "Cameron. Mr. Cameron," she repeated softly. "I appreciate that." He smiled too quickly and moved on. As the plane taxied, Celeste placed her satchel under the seat and leaned back. She could hear the flight attendants exchanging clipped pleasantries, could feel the undercurrent of anticipation. They knew who she was, and they didn't know what she'd do. But that wasn't why she was here. She pulled out her notebook, not the phone, not the tablet, just the notebook, the one she used when she needed her thoughts to slow down enough to catch. She opened it to a clean page. At the top, she wrote, "What silence teaches us." And below that, 1. Who holds the power to name. 2. Who apologizes first. 3. Who changes the subject. 4. Who asks to be understood but never listens. The plane lifted. Clouds pressed against the windows. And Celeste rode on. 2 hours later, the plane began its descent into Atlanta. The flight had been uneventful. No snide remarks, no excessive friendliness, just professionalism. Too professional. The kind that feels performative. The kind that feels like it's trying not to be caught rather than trying to be better. As the wheels touched down, the cabin filled with the soft rustling of passengers gathering their things. Celeste didn't move. She waited until the rows ahead cleared. When she finally stepped into the aisle, she was alone at the back. Cameron stood near the cockpit, arms crossed. "Hope everything was to your satisfaction. Ms. Morgan." She looked at him for a moment, then handed him a small envelope, inside a handwritten note. "Thank you for your courtesy. Let's see how much of it remains when you don't know I'm watching. See you again soon. Celeste Morgan." She didn't wait for his reaction. She walked off the plane and into the next city, ready for the next flight, the next silence, the next truth, because she wasn't collecting apologies. She was collecting data. Celeste walked into the terminal, eyes calm but deeply watchful. Every movement around her was recorded not with a camera, but with memory sharp, silent, steady. She didn't head toward the car service exit. Instead, she turned left toward the regional concourse, away from the business lounge and VIP lines. This was the part of the airport where uniforms outnumbered suits, where people spoke in clipped sentences with morning breath and muscle memory, where the real story always began. A maintenance worker pushing a mop cart paused when he saw her. Recognition flashed in his eyes, but he didn't say anything. He just nodded. She returned it without a word. She liked the silence in places like this. It wasn't always safe, but it was honest. As she passed a side hallway, her phone buzzed. Marcus Ellery again. "Final review is in." 4 crew members filed false logs. 2 supervisors misreported cabin incidents for over a year. "They're done." Celeste replied simply. "Schedule the call. All regions. I'll address them myself. No edits. No press team." She slipped the phone back into her coat. Her next flight was in 3 hours. That gave her time. At the end of the hallway was a door marked Crew Resource Unit, authorized personnel only. She tapped her badge on the scanner. The lock clicked. Inside was a small glass-enclosed workspace lined with charging stations, lockers, and a coffee machine humming from overuse. Only one person was there, a woman, early 50s, dark hair pulled back in a bun. Her posture was perfect, her face lined not by age, but by effort. She didn't notice Celeste at first, too focused on the stack of shift schedules in front of her. "Maureen," Celeste said gently. The woman looked up, startled. Then she smiled. "Well now, I was wondering when you'd show up." Celeste sat across from her. "I thought you retired." "I did. But Atlanta's been short on ethics trainers since April. Figured I'd come back. Try to undo some damage before the next wave gets in." Celeste studied her. "You still got the notebook." Maureen pulled it from her bag. Same cracked leather, same ribbon bookmark. I keep it with me. Every flight, every shift. Celeste nodded. How long until your next orientation? 20 minutes. Group of 12. Mixed hires. Celeste leaned forward. I want to speak to them. Maureen raised an eyebrow. No warning. No script, no filters. Maureen stood. I'll clear the room. Within minutes, a small training space was ready. 12 flight crew recruits sat in plastic chairs, sipping coffee, murmuring among themselves. One noticed Celeste walk in and nudge the person next to them. No introduction, no title, just her presence. Celeste walked to the front and looked at each face. You're all new, she said softly. Some of you probably think this is just a job, a stop on the way to something bigger. That's fine. But let me ask you something. She paused. What do you think you're really being paid for? A few awkward glances. Then someone said, safety. Another muttered, customer service. Celeste nodded slowly. Those are the tasks. But you're being paid to witness, to carry someone's grandmother's last goodbye, to escort a father who hasn't slept since the custody hearing, to walk a teenager down the aisle while they cry into their hoodie. The room went still. Some days, it's easy. People smile. Thank you. Hand you chocolates. Other days, you'll watch a passenger humiliated because of their name, their hair, their tone. You'll feel it in your bones that something's off. And in that moment, you'll have a choice. She paused again. Be the silence that allows it, or be the voice that changes it. One woman near the back raised her hand. What if we get punished for speaking up? Celeste nodded. You might. She looked around the room. But you'll be remembered, and sometimes your courage gives someone else the air they didn't know they needed. No one looked away now. Celeste held up a thin folder. This is a letter from a passenger. She thanked a crew member who quietly stood beside her when she was being mistreated. That crew member, she's one of your trainers now. Another pause. And this, she said, holding a second slip of paper, is a resignation letter from a flight leader who thought no one was watching. He was wrong. Silence. Then someone clapped. Another followed. Soon, the room filled with quiet, meaningful applause. Not for drama, for understanding. Maureen stepped in as Celeste handed her the folder. I think they're awake now, Celeste whispered. She walked out without ceremony. There were no cameras, no headlines, just the soft sound of people realizing they had a role in something larger than uniform codes and beverage carts. As she walked back into the terminal, her phone lit up again. This time it was Adrian Voss, her general counsel. We've received requests from 3 independent airlines to license our empathy training model. Also, the Hill is requesting an op-ed. Shall we proceed? Celeste stopped walking, then typed, let them wait. The real story's not finished yet. She glanced up at the gate signs. One pointed toward her scheduled flight. But she turned the other way. She wasn't leaving Atlanta just yet, because change didn't live in policy memos. It lived in moments like these, and Celeste Morgan was far from done. Celeste stood at the edge of Concourse B, just past the bookstore where they always displayed travel pillows and bestseller thrillers no one ever finished. She wasn't reading. Her eyes were on the reflection in the window. A young black woman, 23 at most, was standing at the gate desk holding a boarding pass with both hands. Her posture was guarded, not defensive, just used to explaining herself. The gate agent was leaning on the counter with a look Celeste knew too well. It was the kind of smile that said, I'm doing you a favor, while simultaneously reminding you that you didn't belong. Celeste didn't move yet. She watched. The woman leaned forward slightly, voice soft but firm. "This says, Group 1, Seat 3A. The agent shrugged. "There must be a mistake. That section's usually reserved for platinum elites. You sure someone didn't gift it to you?" The woman stiffened. "I booked it myself." Celeste's fingers tightened around the strap of her bag. "Not yet. Let it unfold." The agent tapped the keyboard slowly, theatrically. "Well, I guess you can go ahead. Just don't be surprised if someone asks you to move." The young woman took her ticket and turned toward the seating area. Celeste stepped in front of her path. Gently. "Excuse me," she said. The woman looked startled, then surprised again when she recognized her. "Oh, wow." Your Celeste smiled, holding up a hand. "Just Celeste. What's your name, Raya? May I walk with you?" "Raya." She nodded, puzzled but open. They sat down near the window. Celeste didn't speak right away. Neither did Raya. Eventually, Celeste said, "What happened at that counter is something I know too well." Raya hesitated. "It's fine." Celeste tilted her head. "But it's not." Raya let out a breath. "I just didn't want to make a scene. You know how it is. If I push back, I'm the difficult one, the problem, the story." Celeste looked at her. "What if being the story is exactly what's needed?" Raya's expression shifted. Something in her shoulders softened. "I don't want to be famous for being humiliated." Celeste nodded. "Neither did I. And yet here we are." Raya laughed a little, surprised by her own voice. "I saw your video. You were so calm." "I wasn't," Celeste said gently. "I was burning on the inside. But not everything on fire makes smoke." Silence settled between them again. Then Raya asked, "Why didn't you yell? Why not say who you were right away?" Celeste looked toward the gate. "Because if I have to announce my worth to be treated with respect, it's not respect, it's performance." Raya nodded slowly. Then her voice dropped. "Do you think it'll ever change?" Celeste paused. "It already is." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a card. Black embossed lettering. No logos, just a name and a private line. "If you ever feel that flame in your chest again, the one that tells you this isn't just about you, call me." Raya took the card reverently, like it was made of something heavier than paper. "Thank you." Celeste stood, bored confidently. "Raya, Seat 3A belongs to you. The sky belongs to all of us." She walked away before Raya could respond, because that's what needed to happen. Not grandstanding, empowerment. She returned to the Crew Resource Center for her scheduled internal call. It was the quarterly compliance review, usually a dull exercise in metrics and language tweaking, but not this time. As the screen loaded, 32 boxes appeared executives from every regional hub, every domestic brand under Viren Holdings. Some looked exhausted. Others looked defensive. Celeste began without preamble. "The footage from Flight 736 has been viewed over 12 million times. But this call isn't about views. It's about values." She let that sink in. The issue isn't isolated, and it isn't new. We've tolerated microaggressions and weaponized politeness in our crew culture for too long. That ends now. A VP from Houston raised his hand. "With respect, Celeste, we can't police every word a crew member says." Celeste leaned in. "I don't want you to police speech. I want you to challenge assumptions. The same way we retrain for emergency exits, we must retrain for dignity. It's a matter of safety. Emotional safety is part of passenger care." Another exec from Seattle chimed in. Are we talking terminations? We're talking transformation, Celeste replied. But yes, if that includes removing individuals who refuse to evolve, then that's the cost of progress. A silence fell over the group. Then someone unmuted quietly. A woman from the Midwest Division. My daughter's biracial, she said. Last year, she asked me why I always fly economy when I could use my upgrade. I told her I didn't want people to stare. Her voice cracked. She saw the video. Celeste. She said, that woman didn't flinch, and now she wants to be a pilot. Celeste's eyes softened. That's how it begins. The screen fell silent again. Then one by one, executives nodded. There would still be resistance, but the wall had cracked. After the call ended, Celeste sat alone in the quiet of the operations center. A screen showed a delayed flight. Another showed crew assignments. But her eyes weren't on data. They were on memory. She thought of her grandmother's voice, sharp as thunder when telling stories about the train stations of the 1950s, about being asked to sit near the coal, about choosing dignity even when options were few. Celeste whispered into the empty room. They never wanted us in first class. Not because we couldn't afford it, but because they couldn't afford to see us as equal. Her voice didn't echo. It settled. Like a stone in deep water. She closed her eyes. Tomorrow would bring more flights, more conversations, more truth. But tonight, a young woman named Raya would sit in seat 3A with her head held high. And someone at the gate would think twice before asking, are you sure change didn't always roar? Sometimes it arrived like this, one boarding pass at a time. The next morning, Celeste boarded Flight 289 to New Orleans. It was a short flight, barely 2 hours, but she wasn't after the destination. She was watching the system. The aircraft was an older Airbus, still running under Virion's Southern Tide subsidiary. A company with mixed reviews, barely compliant crew retraining, and a reputation for discipline only when the media demanded it. She booked seat 7B, deliberately choosing a middle row near the rear lavatory. It was the least desired spot on the plane. That was the point. At 7:42, passengers began to board. A mother with 2 toddlers, a travel nurse with sleep in her eyes, a man in a crisp blazer who spoke too loudly on his phone. Celeste kept her gaze down. From the rear of the cabin, 2 flight attendants prepped trays and adjusted overhead bins. One of them, a tall woman with cropped blonde hair, was chatting with a male colleague about weekend plans. Neither noticed her, until Celeste stood to make room for the mother with toddlers. The male attendant looked up, then looked at Celeste, then looked again. "Excuse me," he said, voice sharp. "Ma'am, you'll need to let the mother through." "I am," Celeste replied calmly, stepping aside to help the woman lift a bag. He didn't move, just stood there, still watching her. "You're not in the right row," he said. "Yes," she answered, showing her boarding pass. 17B. He didn't apologize, just walked off. The blonde attendant looked at Celeste with narrowed eyes. "Just so you know, this isn't a jump seat row. You won't get special space." Celeste gave a soft smile. "I didn't expect any." For a moment. Silence. Then the attendant turned and mumbled, "Not my business." But it was. Every moment was someone's business. The plane filled. The overhead bins clicked shut. The flight leader, a man in his 50s with sun-weathered skin and a southern accent, did a brief welcome over the intercom. He sounded disinterested, tired, hollow. At 8:06, the aircraft pushed back. 20 minutes later, they were in the air. The beverage cart began its descent down the aisle. When it reached Celeste's row, the same male attendant from earlier stopped. "What would you like, water?" "Please," she said. He poured it, handed it to the woman by the window, then moved on, without giving her anything. Celeste didn't say a word. Not yet. 3 rows later, she stood up quietly and walked to the rear galley. The blonde attendant was facing away, wiping down trays. Celeste waited. When she turned, their eyes met. "I never got my water." "Oh, did you ask?" "Yes." Celeste said gently. "You poured it, then gave it to someone else." The attendant blinked, then laughed a little. "Sorry, it's hectic back here. Some people just have those forgettable faces." Celeste nodded once, then said, "Is that what this is?" The attendant paused. "Look, if you're going to complain," Celeste's voice stayed level. "I'm not complaining. I'm observing. There's a difference." The attendant scoffed and poured a cup. "I'll bring it to your seat." "No need," Celeste replied, taking it herself. Back at her seat, she sipped slowly. The water was warm. No ice. She wrote in her notebook. Forgettable face. Middle row. Unseen. Deliberately. She looked out the window, even though the view was clouds. What hurt most wasn't the neglect. It was how practiced it was. How routine. As if her presence inconvenienced a narrative they'd already written. She thought of every report she'd read, every complaint dismissed as a misunderstanding, every formal apology issued without reflection, and she realized this wasn't about a cup of water. It never had been. It was about the 1,000 paper cuts of being reduced, diminished, filtered, sanitized, so others could stay comfortable in their assumptions. After landing, Celeste waited until everyone else deplaned. The crew gathered near the front, laughing about lunch plans and gate delays. As she approached, the male attendant saw her and sighed audibly. "Need something else?" "Ma'am." "Yes," she said softly, handing him a card. On the back was a handwritten note. "We met today. You didn't see me. Now I need you to remember everything you did. And ask why. Celeste Morgan." He stared at the card, then looked up, his mouth opened. Closed. "You're her," he whispered. She didn't confirm it. She didn't need to. Instead, she turned to the flight leader. "Your culture report is outdated by 6 months. That's a violation," the man stammered. "We've been short-staffed in compliance." "No," she said simply. "You've been overstaffed in ego." And with that, she walked off the jet bridge. The New Orleans heat met her at the curb. She didn't pause. There were people waiting. Not for her. For change. Later that evening, she convened a special audit team on a private call. Marcus Ellery, Adrian Voss, a new face Kesh Patel, recently promoted to Director of Internal Standards. They listened as she described the flight. The words, "forgettable face," echoed like a quiet bomb through the call. Marcus was the first to speak. "How do you want to proceed?" Celeste replied without hesitation. "We add covert assessments to all Tier 2 hubs. No alerts, no favoritism, real conditions." Adrian nodded. "And the crew suspended pending investigation," Celeste said. "If it confirms bias training failures, they're out," Kesh added. "We should draft an addendum to the ARI protocol. Include microbehavioral pattern tracking, language choice, response times." Celeste agreed. "Call it Cabin Integrity Index." Silence. Then Adrian smiled. "That's bold." Celeste leaned back. "It's overdue." That night, she returned to her hotel overlooking the Mississippi River. She didn't turn on the lights. She stood by the window, watching boats drift across the water like secrets refusing to sink. She thought of her mother, who once told her, "They'll try to make you feel small. So small you'll forget how large your spirit is. Don't let them." She hadn't, and she wouldn't. Because now, her silence wasn't compliance. It was strategy, and the fire they ignored in the cabin, it was hers now, to burn what was broken and build what should have been, all along. The wind howled outside Verne Holdings' Atlanta headquarters, but inside the boardroom, you could hear a pen drop. Celeste sat at the head of the long glass table, fingers steepled beneath her chin, expression unreadable. Around her were 12 department heads, regional officers, and legal advisors. No one dared speak first, not because they feared her, but because they knew something was coming, and it would be different from anything they'd heard before. "Yesterday," Celeste began quietly, "I flew coach on a short-haul southern tide route. I was ignored, spoken to like a disruption, dismissed." She paused. "I was called forgettable." Murmurs shifted through the room. Adrian Voss leaned slightly forward, but Celeste lifted one hand gently. "I'm not angry," she said. "I'm clear." Her voice carried no fury, only focus. "In my seat, millions of passengers have sat. Some without the tools to speak up, some without anyone to believe them, some who carried that insult home and folded it into themselves like shame." She reached down and opened a folder. Inside were 6 sheets of paper. Each one carried names. "This," she said, sliding the sheets down the table, "is the chairwoman's list. No one reached for it. Not yet." Celeste continued, "These are the crew members, managers, and compliance officers who, in the last 18 months, contributed directly or indirectly to our culture of permission. Permission to discriminate, permission to ignore, permission to wound quietly." Kesh Patel picked up one of the sheets. His face tightened. "This is a third of our active roster in 2 regions. "Yes," Celeste said. "They're not all malicious," Adrian added gently. "They don't need to be," Celeste replied. "They just need to protect the status quo long enough to dull us." Silence, then a young woman at the end of the table. "Taryn." Director of Human Integration spoke. "What happens next?" Celeste looked at her. "We issue performance audits, immediate retraining, and where applicable terminations. I'm invoking Section 8 of the ARI Protocol, effective now." Section 8 was rarely used. It allowed the chairwoman unilateral action if systemic risk to the brand's integrity was uncovered. Kesh folded his hands. "You're setting a precedent." "I intend to," Celeste said calmly. "For the next hour." Details unfolded. Logistics, replacement crew recruitment, communication strategy, a parallel launch of the Cabin Integrity Index real-time evaluations, monitored anonymously, reporting directly to her office. At 11:13 a.m., the meeting ended, but Celeste remained seated. When the last executive left, she closed the folder slowly. There was one more name not on the paper. Her own. She wasn't exempt from this reckoning, because years ago, when she first made partner at Virion, she had turned down an anonymous complaint from a Latina gate agent who said her manager regularly called her the diversity pick. Celeste hadn't ignored it. She'd flagged it, but she hadn't fought for it. She hadn't made the phone call. She hadn't followed up, and 3 months later, the woman resigned. That story still lived in her, folded like an old note in a jacket pocket. She didn't pretend it hadn't happened. Instead, she wrote the woman's name in the back of her notebook. One day, she'd call her and apologize. By noon, Celeste was on another plane this time heading to Denver. This flight was different. Clean uniforms, welcoming crew, respectful tone. It was obvious someone had notified them. She smiled politely, took her seat, and said nothing. Because even hospitality, when staged, was still theater. She didn't want theater. She wanted truth. At 3:48 p.m., the plane touched down. By 4:10, she entered the Denver Regional Operations Center. They had prepped for her visit, of course. Flowers on the front desk, polished floors, fresh badges. But she didn't go through the front. She took the service corridor used by janitors and mechanics. She passed a bulletin board with 4 months' worth of outdated memos. She paused in front of a taped flyer that read, "Speak up. You're safe here." She stared at it for a long moment, then whispered, "Are they at 4:30 p.m.?" She sat in on a crew debrief. It wasn't publicized. No one knew she'd be there. The team trickled in, still in uniform, eyes tired. The flight leader, a black woman in her early 30s named Nisha, looked surprised to see her but recovered fast. Celeste gestured for her to proceed. Nisha began the session like clockwork. Route summary, passenger issues, equipment notes. Then she hesitated. "There was a situation in 14C," she said carefully. Passenger grew agitated when asked to stow laptop. Said we were targeting him. Someone asked, "Was he?" Black Nisha nodded. The room shifted. Someone muttered, "Always looking for trouble." Celeste cleared her throat. All eyes turned to her. "Let me ask something," she said softly. "Have any of you ever felt unseen?" No one spoke. "Have any of you been spoken over? Laughed at, corrected in public when you were right?" A few nods. Celeste folded her hands. "That passenger in 14C, maybe he's exhausted. Maybe he's been followed in stores, ignored at counters, questioned about upgrades. Maybe you weren't the problem, but maybe you were the tipping point." A long pause. Then Nisha said, "I thought about that." Celeste met her eyes. "And that's why you're the kind of leader we keep." After the session, Nisha found her in the hallway. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course." "Why now?" "Why push this hard?" Celeste smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Because we're late." She looked toward the tarmac where another plane was being loaded. "And the cost of waiting is too high." That night, back in her hotel, she ordered tea and opened her laptop. Emails, messages, press requests. But one caught her eye. A direct message from Raya. "Made it home. Still thinking about our talk. I start pilot school next month. Just wanted you to know. I won't forget you." Celeste stared at the screen, then closed the laptop gently. The chairwoman's list wasn't just names to remove. It was lives to protect, stories to lift, spirits to unbury. The next morning, she would fly again, not because she needed to, but because the work was in the cabin, in the crew, in the silence, and in the fire, still burning. Celeste stood in the private jetway of Gate 17 at Boston Logan International Airport, holding nothing but her phone and a leather-bound folder. This flight wasn't on the schedule. It wasn't listed in the app. There were no press cameras, no security entourage, no announcements, only a simple departure. One final trip. She watched the aircraft being fueled. It bore the new logo they had spent months perfecting, a rising arc of sky. Embedded with 3 subtle stars, the trinity of principles she insisted on embedding into the soul of every decision: dignity, visibility, and truth. Flight 88. The symbolic test flight for the newly restructured Skyline division. This flight had no elite lounge, no upgraded menus, no artificial smiles. It was staffed with a carefully chosen crew people from different regions, backgrounds, and training levels. Most had never met each other. They didn't know Celeste would be on board. They didn't know the real purpose of this flight. It wasn't a drill. It was Judgment Day. Celeste stepped onto the aircraft at 8:43 a.m. She wore a navy blue coat, minimal makeup, and a worn travel bag slung over her shoulder. Just another passenger. She took seat 14D, middle row, not window, not aisle, just the middle, where stories gather and elbows brush, and humanity has nowhere to hide. The plane filled slowly, a family of 5, a tech consultant, a young woman reading a novel called This Close to Home, and an older white man in a tailored gray suit who glanced at her, then looked away, then looked again. She felt his eyes, not curious, assessing. She didn't flinch. At 9:10, the lead flight attendant, a warm, dark-skinned man named Julian, introduced the safety demonstration with sincerity. His eyes scanned every face. His tone never slipped into robotic memorization. Celeste took note. The blonde woman working the forward galley smiled genuinely when she passed out ginger ale. Her name tag read, Aaron. There were small moments, someone helping another with their bag. A quiet laugh between crew. It felt different. Not perfect, but aware. And that was enough. Until row 12. Celeste's ears caught the shift. The man in the gray suit was standing, talking to Julian. I don't mean to be rude, he said, voice low. But is she supposed to be sitting back here? Julian blinked. I'm sorry. The man glanced back at Celeste. I've seen her before. Online. I think she runs this company. If that's her, shouldn't she be up front? Julian's face didn't move. She's seated exactly where she booked. Sir. The man looked frustrated. Look, I just think optics matter. It's not a good look for the airline to have her here, crammed in with who Julian asked, voice neutral but edged. The man straightened. Never mind. He sat back down. Celeste said nothing, but she saw everything. Julian turned slightly and caught her eye. He gave a small nod. Nothing more. That flight went smoothly. No fanfare, no mistakes, no favoritism. As they landed in Atlanta, the plane taxied toward a quiet hangar, away from the terminal. The pilot came over the intercom. We'd like to thank you for flying with us today. We know you have a choice, and we're grateful when your choice is conscious. It was a subtle phrase, but intentional. At 12:06 p.m., passengers disembarked onto the tarmac. Celeste waited until last. As she stepped out, the sun caught her face. Waiting on the concrete below were all 8 board members of Virion Holdings, every one of them dressed in navy and gray. Beside them stood the entire crew of Flight 888. Confused, curious, Julian looked over and blinked as Celeste approached. She shook his hand warmly. You knew who I was, she said. He smiled. I did. The moment you walked on. Why didn't you act like it? Because I was trained, he said gently, to treat everyone like they matter, not just the powerful. She turned to the rest of the crew. Each of you was chosen because you passed the metrics of the Cabin Integrity Index, not only in performance but in heart. She looked to the board. I want this crew to be the new standard, the new face, the new truth. The chairman of the board stepped forward. Celeste, the press wants a statement. They're asking what message this restructuring sends. Celeste looked around, at the plane, at the crew, at the sky, wide and pale above them. Then she turned back, voice clear but full of emotion. You ask what message we're sending? She paused, then said, 6 words. Dignity is not a class upgrade. Silence, then applause. Not loud, not performative, but full, whole, real. Because everyone there knew what it meant. Those 6 words would headline articles, appear on banners, echo in training rooms and corporate keynotes. But they weren't meant for show. They were meant for the woman who once waited in a boarding line holding a first-class ticket, but feeling like a trespasser. They were meant for the crew member who swallowed discomfort when his teammate mocked a name he couldn't pronounce. They were meant for the girl in 3A who walked onto a plane and wondered if she'd be told to move. Those 6 words were a promise that no one would ever again be asked to prove they deserved to be seen, that no voice would be ignored simply because it didn't rise, that respect wouldn't be conditional. Celeste stood with the crew, sunlight casting shadows behind them. No longer a shadow herself. Later that week, as she walked into a quiet bookstore near the airport, a woman at the counter looked up and smiled. "Are you her?" she asked gently. "The one from the plane?" Celeste smiled. "I'm someone who believes we can be better." The woman nodded. "Thank you." Celeste paused, then added, "We're just getting started." She left the store without fanfare, without entourage, just a quiet presence, moving through the world she was helping to rebuild. One flight at a time, one voice at a time, one truth at a time. She never raised her voice. She never asked for revenge. She simply stood her ground and let truth speak louder than protocol. In a world where racial bias still hides in polite smiles, in soft slights, and in middle seats meant to silence Celeste, Morgan turned quiet pain into global reform. And in just 6 words, she reminded us all, dignity is not a class upgrade. So, the next time you see someone being ignored, talked down to, or treated as less than, remember this story. Because what we tolerate in silence becomes the standard of tomorrow. This isn't just about a plane. It's about every space where someone is told they don't belong until someone like Celeste walks in and rewrites that truth. If this story moved you, if it made you think, feel, or reflect, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us tell more stories that hold power accountable and lift up every voice that's been pushed to the back. Stay tuned, because the next story might just change everything.